The what? The bird list?
The Brutalist.
Oh, the
It's a,
brutalist. Oh, not going to be on my top of my list. What did you think?
well, it's brilliant. I mean, there's parts of it that are just absolutely just art, just pure art, right? And of course, Adrian Brody he's just phenomenal. And I'm a big fan of Guy Pearce as well. I mean, they're just both so splendid in it. It's a really rough story, it's hard to watch at times, the politics, the pain, a lot of pain, the violence, the title isn't just the building style, it's the world, right? And so he was representing the world in his designs, and he reveals that at the end, right? It becomes clear at the end what he was doing. But if you know anything about brutalism,
Yeah,
which
one of
most
my
people I would say,
friends' dad was quite a well-known brutalist architect. So yeah, absolutely.
yeah, I think most people though in America aren't into architecture, and they don't know the style. They just know the build. I know that building. But they don't know what it's called. They don't know the aesthetic behind it, and they don't know the Bauhaus, and they don't know any of that European architecture experience, much about European history. So I think but it's well done. It's worth seeing, but I would not let my child see it.
Yeah, no, we do
Hi, Mark.
have to draw the line with Edgar somewhere. Hi, Mark.
We're just talking about The Brutalist, which I saw last night,
Oh, right.
and it's brutal.
Oh,
The
right. Okay.
title is true.
Mhm.
Visually speaking, obviously, Severance is not the environment, but the cinematography is just wow. It's such a nice thing to see.
I did enjoy Conclave, which I watched the other night.
Yes. What'd you think? Did you like it?
Well, who thought, men in frocks? How exciting could that be? But no, it actually worked. Yeah, it's just well plotted, and in a sense, it was almost like a stage play in a way because it was all tightly contained.
Right.
But no, it didn't drag at all, and it was the kind of thing that you sort of read the synopsis, you think, really, we're going to watch this. But no, I really enjoyed it.
With the
Sounds like
Pope
a film
dying
by
right
Monty
now,
Python.
with the Pope dying right now, you can imagine that based on what we learned about the conclave, everybody's scuttling around for power right now, waiting
Yeah.
for him to die, as opposed to trying to keep him alive. I just imagine. But I thought Ray Fine was fabulous in it as he always is. I thought, um, oh my God,
Yeah.
Stanley
Tucci.
Yeah.
Tucci, whom I've always had a crush on.
Yeah.
I thought he played Stanley Tucci. I don't see him as being anything different. He always and so watching him in that role didn't make any sense. He was out of place in that role. I want him to start talking about pasta.
Yes. Rolling his eyes at the butter.
Going, this is fantastic, fantastico. But yeah, I thought I loved it, and I thought the cinematography would have to be beautiful because they're all wearing red.
Mm.
Yeah, good point.
Anyway, so yeah, I don't. I mean, it's been winning a bunch of awards, but I haven't seen this Honora, which I don't think I'll see. And what's the other one that's gotten a lot of rave reviews? There's one more. Anyway, it's not been a good year for me going to movies.
Just trying to find something for you guys there.
Mark, did you see that Christian nationalists are trying to keep married women from voting?
I just, where will it end? It feels a bit
Maybe
sort of,
not in America. I told John, because we're so settled here, right? The house is great,
yeah,
job is great. I mean, I've got everything's just like perfect here, right?
yeah,
And then I think, okay, if I'm gonna lose my ability to vote. I can't live in a country I can't vote in if I'm born here. I mean, I can see moving to Czechoslovakia. I
yeah.
wasn't born there. I don't get to vote. At least I didn't think I was going to be able to vote. It's kind of a shock.
It just, I mean, it's amazing in a sense how quickly things have turned towards autocracy.
Well, it was the only way for the Christian right to get any real grab of anything because democracy wouldn't just kept denying them.
For understandable reasons.
Okay, fine. Things on the table. The kind of interesting provocation with Fabienne over after dinner with lots of alcohol in Brussels this weekend was he's actually lived in China, in Shanghai, for 6 months, quite a few years ago. And we talked about different freedoms because I was actually surprised that Brussels is very dirty. There's a huge amount of poverty. It's basically, apart from some nice areas, it's basically very, very unpleasant. And we had to steer specific routes for Edgar not to be completely shocked, only partly shocked. So the only thing I mentioned was last time we were in Beijing, the thought experiment for me is if I was suddenly given control over China, 1.4 billion people, what would I change? Clearly, I do not agree with everything they're doing. But if you do it as a mind thing, as a place to live, unless you get politically interested, it's actually not that bad. So do we have, do we have a reasonable discussion here in the West of what political systems to keep and what to get rid of? Probably not. But we do need to get past where we are.
I guess if I was going to live in a fascist country and be happy, it'd be Singapore.
I did. I grew up in Singapore.
I know. I mean, there are things to like about Singapore.
I wouldn't call Singapore fascist. I would call Singapore not liking America. I mean, Lee Kuan Yew, one of the interviews, he talked about CIA coming over and talking to him all kinds of things, and he just put them on a boat and sent them right back. He didn't want anything to do with America, who absolutely has to control the other countries. But anyway, I'm just saying that we should choose wider, I think, from what our preferences should be. It's easy to be in specific areas. Hey, Carl. Hey, Peter.
Hey, everybody.
Good morning.
So I'm guessing Fabienne and Leon cannot make it with us, or whatever the sentence might be.
Can I mention something to Carl real fast? Carl, one thing I didn't get a chance to say the last time we talked is that we're trying to use Unreal Engine in our lab, and our lab is a Macintosh lab. We're trying to use Unreal Engine to make Apple apps. Do you know that Apple apps can't be made easily with Unreal Engine, even though it only works in it can function in C?
But yeah, because Apple's based in Objective-C, which is a different offshoot from base C than C++ is, which is what the majority of the engine is written in. So yeah, there would be a little extra legwork to go through to make that happy.
Yeah, and what's really sad is that if we say that pure languages is the way to go, that's one example where pure languages doesn't work. So that's one of the reasons why we're having a hard time with engines, and we're building in WebXR. I meant to mention that. Anyway, hi, Peter. I can see Peter. Let's see what. Okay.
Oh, because he's usually brunching early, and here he is in a log cabin and everything.
Well, I'll have to duck off cam to be eating in a little bit, but I'll still be hearing everything, and then I'll be back on cam for a little mini demo later.
I never considered you previously to be a fashion fiend, but the fact that you changed your background to suit your shirt is brilliant. I'm also wearing Pacific Northwest, by the way, but it's not as clear in the video.
That's not Pacific Northwest.
It doesn't have the pattern as much, but it is the brand and things. Okay.
No, darling, you got to look like Peter.
Well, that's obviously my aim in life.
When I got here, we had no clothes for the Pacific Northwest, right? I'm in Dallas, and we're in lots of, chic leather and, silks and satins. And I get here and it's like, no, fuzzy, fuzzy. It took me a long time to gather the wits to get what I needed. Politech, a lot of Politech.
Hello, Mr. Swigert.
Good morning, all.
Hi, Rob. Hey, Rob.
Hey.
I think we are quorum, whatever that means in this context. So let's just start. So we didn't have an agenda for today, but we're going to follow Mark Anderson's agenda. Mark has very kindly been very pushy, and I'm very grateful, saying we must figure out several space things in space. What does that mean? We gotta get onto that. Before that, I'm going to show you 3 slideshows, which are peripherally related. And please remember, when I share a screen, I can't easily see you, so please interrupt me rather than put up a hand, because it's kind of confusing, because then it'll take longer. Is that cool? Anyone have anything initially before to say, announce, question, or whatever? Okay. First thing is, this is what I'm doing in, hang on, I have to move you guys. When screen sharing, it takes a lot, as you know. This is what I'm doing in Reader and Author. Some of you have seen this, not all of you. And this is the data that Mark and I have been talking about. This is for doing an annotated bibliography, right? So the point is that, hang on. The background is that in Author now, you can link to documents, which has proved to be phenomenally interesting, both because it's useful and issues it raises. The way you do that, you make a defined concept, and then you link it to something, right? So that means that while you're in Author, you can click to copy this thing, or you can open the source. So that's nice. But the key thing that's being talked about here, because Dini has very kindly narrowed down the vast world of academic work to basically doing reviews, annotated bibliography, which is of course going all the way back, Dini, to what you wrote in the Sloan, which is perfect. So it means that a key thing we are supporting is someone reads one document, writes one thing about it, puts that in a new document so other people can see what they've done. It's like doing initial research or a full annotated bibliography, right? So we're adding a simple option, which is annotate document when you control click in on a PDF. You get a little dialogue and you write it in like this, something like this. Because an annotated bibliography is not an essay. It's relatively short and it's saying something, and Dini, please do interrupt me because I'll probably get some of this wrong. It's something like, this document is relevant to the work I'm doing because of this and that. It's not brilliant for this reason, and so on, right, Dini? Something like that?
Actually, no, actually, well, it depends what kind of annotation you're talking about. The kind of annotations I do is basically a summary.
Right,
And
right.
if it's something that I need, I'll put it in a, like I'll have a folder with ones that I'm going to use, and I have a folder of ones I'm not going to use. But I don't want to lose because I might need them some other time, right?
Yeah, exactly. So here
And
is,
Carl, let me ask Carl. Carl, how are you doing annotations with your dissertation and research?
I am skipping a few steps according to the other students, in that I know that my dissertation has to be formatted in a very particular way to be submitted to the library when it is done. So I went and grabbed their LaTeX template to start with, and I am writing everything in the LaTeX template as I go. Because I really, really hate fighting with Microsoft Word or Google Docs when formatting things like tables, bullet list, indentations, everything else. And
I'm
having
not
to
talking.
do, oh,
I wasn't
sorry.
talking about the writing part. I was talking about the annotation. Like, how are you organizing your annotations?
For the most part, I'm keeping everything um, in my BibTeX and a folder.
But what are you writing? I mean, how are you addressing annotations? Are you writing a summary? Are you making, I don't usually do value judgments on my annotations. I say very report style. Do you evaluate them and say, this is perfect for what I need? I mean, all I
Okay.
do for that is just put them in a
Sorry,
folder. Use it, not use it.
sorry. I like just finished my coffee. I'm still. Can you annotations like what?
Like when
I,
you're reading an article, like you're reading an article that you're going that sounds interesting and might align with your research. You read the article. An annotation, one type of annotation, the one that I think of as annotation is then I summarize that article. So I annotate annotated bibliography. So I annotate the article or the book by giving a summary of it. And I put the bibliographical information and then I put the summary. If it's something I'm going to use for the dissertation after all, I'll have a document with all the ones I'm using listed, or I have them in individual files and I put them in a folder. If I'm not going to use it, I have a folder that says not using for dissertation or something like that, not using for the article. It doesn't mean I'll throw them away because I probably will use it for something else down the line. But for this particular work, I'm not going to address that article that I just read.
Oh, okay. I basically have been subverting that process. I search for white papers on a specific topic. I start reading them, and if I say this is relevant, I literally just bibtex it and add it to my bibliography, and the LaTeX template will not cite or include that reference in the compiled final document unless I actually cite it somewhere. So I just throw it in my bibtex. Rather than make a few sentences or summaries, I write the pieces of relevant information. I basically do that annotation immediately and then cite that document. And then I put those sentences in whatever part of the outline for the document they need to go in, like whatever section they go in, and cite it. And then later, if I determine, no, I don't need this, I literally just comment it out and I leave the entire block in the document.
Makes sense. Mark had his hand up.
Yeah, I was just noticing. I mean, I was going to say, I think there's something similar because I was looking at the document that Fabienne had sort of posted in the Slack, and it's interesting. But my reaction was, it's true, but it's probably what you do for your first paper when you've got the training wheels on, because it lets you understand how all the bits go together. But my reflection is all the people I interact with who are writing papers don't do that. They do something different, but they don't. But they do different things as well. So it's sort of that they're. To start with, I think the process that was described in that document helps you understand the sort of relationship of referencing to sort of peer-reviewed work if you've not done it before. But I mean, I certainly know when I'm working, the nexus for me is my reference manager, which has to be bookends. So if it's halfway interesting, the first thing I actually do is stop reading the PDF, reference it, check the reference actually points to the thing that I'm looking at, which all too often it doesn't. So I then go fix that data before I do anything else, so that my reference manager knows where this thing is. So if I don't have a local copy, I can go back and find it. I may make some notes in the notes of the reference manager, especially if there's a particular quote that I want and I don't have an easily searchable digital copy. Which is often the case with the book. And then I just tend to essentially make sure the bibtex correct. Then the bibtex goes in the LaTeX document, and I will I have a little macro that basically gives me the citation. I dump the citation in roughly the right place in the document, write a bit around the citation, and that's it. So again, it's quite different to the sort of formulaic process of take something, write this list, then move on. And obviously that's very different. What I'm not trying to do there is to write the sort of, as it were, the formalism of an annotated bibliography, where the entire contents of the document is essentially in the form of a citation and something about the citation.
I'm very glad we stopped on that for a bit because it shows two things. One, people do this very differently from person to person and very differently in different fields. But essentially what we're talking about is doing research, writing down how certain things are useful and using them in our paper, right? And that's the bare bones we need to keep. I'll continue in a second, but Peter, please go.
Yeah, what I tend to do is get the original document into DevonThink, and I really rely heavily in DevonThink on its ability to bring up the listing of all of the words that appear in each document. I find that's incredibly useful. And then I'll also get a deep link from the DevonThink representation of the document to my citation manager of the document and drag those both into Tinderbox so that I can use Tinderbox for working up maps of how the documents relate to one another. But then inside of Tinderbox, I can click on those deep links to jump me back to either DevonThink to get to the original document or the citation manager to get to the appropriate cite key to go dropping into the text I'm writing.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Tom, I'm in the middle of it. You haven't missed really anything, but this is, hang on, I have to move these windows so I can see you guys again. I'm doing a brief overview of a few things in Reader and Author as a model for how we might do it in XR. So when you're reading a PDF, you click a button and you write an annotation. Whatever type might suit the kind of work you're doing, an overview, as Dini was saying, kind of a summary, etc., right? And then you go to Author and you paste it. And it can appear like this. So here is an example. We have the title in bold, the author's name in italic, and the date, followed by an indented paragraph or so of writing that is the annotation. This is the format that you follow, right, Dini, roughly?
Yep.
Yeah. So this has been really, really difficult for me to kind of understand from a data point of view, or technically, I don't know how to say it, but so Mark and I have discussed this at length. So the current way that I'm looking at dealing with it is in Author, if you click on a normal citation, it opens a dialog. You can't just write inside the author date bracket, right? So if you now click on this, it opens up and it has the note, which Mark and I have decided through research, it's actually going to be a field called annotate because it exists and it's useful. Sometimes note is used differently. And here's the key thing. The display as, normally now you can choose to have that display as a block quote with quote marks and brackets, all kinds of different styles. We're just adding another style that is annotated bibliography. And to make it clear, because it's quite non-standard, I know you're not stupid, you're all cleverer than me, but I'm going to repeat it anyway. The new style, all it says is show the citation information followed by the annotate note. That's it. It's just a display style. And I think that's very analogous to what we are talking about in our environment, right? Also important at the bottom here, because in Author, these are considered data objects or knowledge objects. You have the option to, of course, remove it, but you can copy it. So if this is your research document, you can copy it into your working document, and all this metadata goes with it. Really important. And also, if you know this, if the system knows the source, like it came from Reader, you can click open and it'll open the source to the right page. If you look at this dialog at the bottom, it has the file name and page range. That's how it does that. Nothing more sophisticated. If anybody is typing questions, I hope they're not for me because I can't see them. No. Any questions on that? That seemed relatively straightforward, right?
Just one sort of quick clarification, because a thing you touched on, and I think pretty much every here is reasonably au fait with LaTeX, but the issue about note versus annotation labels, the problem is that BibTeX is a format. It doesn't actually define any fields. What people refer to as sort of known BibTeX fields are actually one of two different evolutions, either something called NatBib or something called BibLaTeX. NatBib predates the web, but it's what, I mean, for instance, the ACMs still use it. So the fields that their systems, in other words, their stylized systems expect a certain range of fields. In a sense, we can put in anything we like because, you know, who's to say what's there? So the sort of gateway you've got to fit through is, well, okay, fine, you've put it in BibTeX compliant format data. So anything that can read BibTeX will do that. It may not recognize the field you've got, but I don't think that's a bad thing because we're looking ahead, not backwards.
Yeah.
So I think that, but it's worth drawing the distinction that the notion of there being certain allowed fields is actually illusory. It's something that's effectively accrued through practice, and there is no sort of guiding hand behind the curtain that's actually saying what the rules are, which is both convenient and inconvenient. Thanks.
No, exactly, Mark, and thank you for that. So some of you have seen this. I know Carl has. This is a brief thing, and then I'm showing something even briefer at the end to go back to this discussion. This is essentially you being very kind and indulging me in my obsession with how text should appear on screen. I don't think we are anywhere near doing something like this in XR because of selection issues and all kinds of stuff. but it's really useful for me to get a sense for how you feel about this. So even if you have an infinite space, so to speak, it's not infinite, as we know in XR. So if it's on a rectangle like this, we have the problem of text really needs columns. If they go too wide, it becomes hard to read. So how do we use the computer screen, right? In Author, you can fold it into an outline, which is fine to an extent. The next thing I want to do is consider having the table of contents outline on the left, which can automatically fade or not, depending on your preference. That helps you navigate the document. And remember, this is for reading. This is for writing, authoring. This is not for reading. So this is to help you juggle your whole document in your brain as you're writing. So here's the next thing, and this is the key. Bullet points are my living bane, because when you read them like this, they're really beautiful, really good to get an overview, but look at all the wasted space to the right, right? I have a huge issue with that, because I think that a lot of our writing can conveniently be done, believe it or not, in a rectangle. You know, let's say a large hypercard type thing. So I want to minimize scrolling so we have the visual information available. So if we then go into this prototype where you can have it a list without a bullet, you can actually have the bullet. You know, there are different ways to do it, but you still have that problem with the space. So how about if you write it as a paragraph, then you lose your overview effect. And the positive is, if you look at the bottom of the screen, this is now also available to see. It gains you that much. So how to deal with making this list scrollable? One thing you can do is bold, and that might be okay, but there are some issues. First of all, it's quite strong visually, and also academic documents tend not to like bolding all over the place, you know, if it's not in a proper place. So that's something to consider. You can, of course, make it marked in Author, which makes it orange, which you can then, and this is key, strip on export or turn into bold on export, depending on what you want. That's one way of doing it. So then I thought about doing the opposite. Instead of highlighting stuff, fading it. So what I've done in this example is the text that is extra is faded. So you should be able to see linear text outline reference easily.
Hey, Frode, I have to say, what's interesting about that is that I just taught eraser writing to my digital storytelling students, and they were really surprised to see that art form, and they took to it really well. So they're, you know, they have learned to use Word or Photoshop or different programs to make the text disappear at various and in fade, so they can go at 20%, 80%. And so they've learned to do it so that some of the words show up a little bit, some disappear entirely, and they're left with some words bold-faced. It's been really interesting watching them play with that style.
That is really super cool to hear, because that is exactly what this is about. And so all of you, do anybody have any comment on, remember, this is authoring, this is not reading, on being able to kind of hide a little bit of stuff to make it more skimmable?
I do like that idea, because I have, while working on the background section for my dissertation, the document is starting to get really lengthy. I think it's up to like 30 some pages now. And in order to visually landmark that massive wall of text, for me to find specific places, like where was I just writing, or where does this little piece need to go, I've been using LaTeX comments, which turn blue, in order to landmark things. And it's getting to the point now that there's so many of those that it's, again, not becoming helpful. So being able to like collapse, hide, or just visually soften everything other than a few specific things that I'm looking for would be nice.
That's exactly the problem I'm thinking about. And of course, in Word or Pages, you can change color of text, but it has no semantic meaning, and therefore it has no computability. Any other comments before I move on to finish this bit?
Yeah,
Well,
it's
the only thing I would
Oh, hello, Brandel.
oh
syntax highlighting is an essential component of modern programming, and the idea that people would do without it at this point seems largely incomprehensible. The coloring of types and the separation of statements and things like that. So, I think that having the semantics being conveyed through more than just the sort of the spacing and the positioning of the typographic marks is definitely beneficial.
I'm so grateful, Brandel, you brought this up right now because I probably mentioned Doug Engelbart asked me to do a text where you had color coding of a document. So, for instance, people would be yellow, companies would be blue, whatever. Not just grammar markup, but semantic markup along the way, what you're doing. But there is something I'm going to show you in a slide or two that makes that relevant now. Any other comments before I move on?
Well, I was going to say a brief thing that kind of blows the whole thing up, but and that is that all of these things are clerical, and the amount of time, listening to what Carl said a minute ago about how much time did it take you to assemble that document, and then how usable is it once you've assembled it, right? These are very difficult and complex tech administrative things that you have to do when you're dealing with text. And I think a lot of that is going to get broken down by, and I'm playing with things myself, by AI, because instead of doing this, I can load these into, load the documents into a RAG, limited AI, and run queries on it based on that. And then I can look at things, in a nonlinear fashion. And I know this is non-traditional. I know the conventions around, bibliography and citation and all that sort of stuff are there for a reason, but I also recognize that they're there for a reason that is highly dependent on the fact that we lock up text in books, in linear documents, and so on and so forth. And so I worry that we're going to spend a huge amount of time fixing this, and then, I'm already starting to play with, different ways of using text in a nonlinear fashion, and getting away from that, the clerical nightmare of writing a bibliography, and keeping track of all those citations and everything I ever read and highlighted and so on and so forth. So, I'm not sure we're quite there yet. And I was actually working on a blog this week, and one of the biggest problems, frankly, is this stuff is locked up behind CRM and other paywall kind of stuff, and you can't get the full text in a format that you can then disassemble. That's not a technical problem. That's a human problem. But anyway, I was just going to put that out there.
I think those are very valid comments, and I have no problems using AI to reformat, to explode documents to help you deal with them at all. This is particularly looking at the part of handcrafting a document to make it really readable for yourself and understandable. Doesn't in any way disagree with what you're saying, Tom. I think these are very complementary issues, but also one thing right now, our key thing in the community is trying to figure out what things to have in space, which will be what we'll talk properly about later, and how to interact with them.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that means I write the same list again and again and again. So I'm looking at versions of publish and subscribe. I'm looking at transclusions, but they have to be in ways that are feasibly integratable now. So this is a subset of that. So yeah, we're on the same page. So to finish this off, many ways you can deal with it yourself. Like you could have a line down so it doesn't connect with the intro sentence, whatever, put it back up. This is the proposal. We already have mark, why not have fade? Similar keyboard shortcuts as well. And really massive key. For the marked text, when you export, you can choose to keep it orange bold, or make it just bold, or make it normal text, or delete it so you can use it as notes. can do exactly the same with faded text. So you can make it back to normal black text. And one thing I would absolutely love, if it actually makes sense, is to turn it into bullet points on export. Because reading in this sense is very, very different from writing your own document. Right? It's much nicer to have bullet for that. And so here you can see it's export and it's the same. Now here's kind of a shocking thing. This is author and this is live. And I got this while talking to Deanie earlier. It's actually been implemented. So obviously the coloring needs to be played with, experimented with a lot, but it is there now. So that's why it's fun to have the opportunity to play with it ourselves, because now I can see, is it clerical? Because this is something I would say, Tom, is more like annotating your Facebook pictures or your stamp collection is something you want to massage, you want to play with like a piece of knowledge. Hopefully it shouldn't be too much of a chore. So thank you for the feedback on that. Now, final thing, as you can see, very, very few. Actually, before that, any other comments or questions on that? Okay, I just want to add, because of what you reminded me of, Randall, what we should probably now talk about, some of us who wants to offline, what kind of color coding while authoring? Because now that I have the ability, of course it's trivial, to strip it on export, while you're authoring, you may want to turn that on and off. And of course, we have it in Reader already. In Reader, we have the color keywords. So I think it's something like this. But it doesn't change the text because you can't do that in a PDF easily. But thank you for highlighting that it would be probably very useful to change it while you're writing.
Absolutely, and yeah, another exemplar would be Blender and the modality that you get from different colors, the way that most movies are actually done in this garbage-looking kind of different color per shell, like different color per sort of subsurface of a person's face, and so you have a picture of Mickey Mouse, and it's just a horrific kind of mishmash of stapled together surfaces. No wonder they end up making the movies that they want to make rather than the ones that the system does. I did actually have another sort of question. You touched
Who's
on
that, Fabian? What's that next to you?
Hello, hello.
Sorry,
Oh,
Brando, but
fantastic.
I'm very distracted here. How did you manage
No,
that?
it's for a good
That's
cause.
fantastic. Oh my goodness.
Welcome to Seattle. How's it
I
going?
knew you were traveling, but I actually thought you were going to go see Leon. So hello, Adam.
Nope. We don't want to make any noise for now.
Very, very good to see you. Okay, we're going to go back to Brandel, and then we're going to go into the main thing, which I'm so glad you're both here for, because it's all of this other stuff's been just for fun. Sorry, Randall, that was just too much for me not to be interrupted. Please go ahead.
No, absolutely. I would have done the same thing if I had realized from the little thumbnail window. So the question you might have gone into it earlier, but pagination versus scrolling and what sort of cognitively is the impact? Is there a particular animus to scrolling, or what is it? What are the primary sort of, you were talking about achieving the ability to have that many more sort of lines of text.
I can tell you that. That's the greatest question ever. First of all, you may not know this, but I had lunch with Bill Atkinson. Well, you were there, right? So Bill is obviously a huge hero of many of us, and he didn't like scrolling because he wanted to be kind of easy and digestible. The term glanceable is really important to me. I think I was the first one to write it on the internet. When I searched for it, no one else had. This goes back to the 90s, right? I really think it's important that information is within eyes reach, controls within hands reach. That's my principle. Not everybody agrees. That's fine. So nothing wrong with scrolling, but scrolling hides stuff. In fact, there's a great line in some monster movie where someone does something clever and someone says, "How do you know?" And they say they hide that stuff in books, right? Books are literally hiding information, aren't they? They have covers on them. They hide stuff. So our job here is to make it accessible. And if text is slightly below the fold, unless you make the you won't see it. So even in an XR space, we can have things here, there, and around, and all these wonderful things. If it's not visually there, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So that is why I'm so passionate. I'm a designer person, so I want minimalism, white space. Of course I do. But it comes at a cost. So to have a discussion like this repeatedly with an audience of incredibly diverse minds and preferences is really, really valuable. So I'm going to be doing what you said, Randall, about the different coloring. But I think now would be a good time to skip on to the brief thing, introduction to the, what are you saying, Carl?
Oh, so
Yes, no.
he's saying he doesn't mind scrolling. I did want to say I've been reading a bunch of books on my phone for the last while, obviously. The ones that aren't in paper, and then also occasionally reading very long documents as web pages on my phone. And one of the things that I've been struck by is the integrity, for what it lacks. Obviously, a phone book page is pretty poor in terms of its affordances of how far you are through the book, all of those kinds of things. And it's very difficult to scan to know, go back 10 pages, 5 pages or whatever, in comparison to the concreteness of where you are in a paper book. But I found that I actually preferred the context of having a full, fresh, paginated piece of text to a continuous scrolling region of text for the layout of it. One of the challenges of a phone is that the text size is such that these things tend to be dynamically paginated, so that there's not an integrity to that sort of corpus that's ready to hand, and sort of in your phrasing, Frode. But I am cognizant of that, and I've been thinking a lot about actually trying to fully paginate just my browser window pages in the phone as well, just for the benefit of being able to have the expectation that this is a fully fresh thing that I'm looking at. It's related to the last thing, but if I look at this thing, then it's all new. So yeah, I applaud the ability to be able to kind of construct more mindfully. We have incredible complexity for text wrapping, line wrapping, in order to make sure we don't break up words. Taking that same level of attention to the integrity of a page, the integrity of what's visible and ready to hand per screen, I think is actually really important and laudable as a thing to kind of render more concrete our ability to reason about what's in front of us.
100%. That's one of the reasons I'm very happy that Adam is here, because he helps me anyway. I'm not sure about the rest of you. Think in different directions, like incredibly digitally and then paper. I really like the crack of the book for my thumb. Right, I was reading Leibniz yesterday because Mike Whitmore told me I had to. And to hold that little paperback book like that, the Kindle or anything, it can't do that for the physicality. So I then went to author. Could I change so that I could print out like a little paperback book from author? And it took a few steps, but I can. So to have that as part of our continuous of how we look at things is really important. Right, okay, I'm going to do a really quick slidey thing, and so that just to center the discussion on what we're talking about today. This was done in 5 minutes before I saw Dini today, because this has been frustrating the heck out of me. So here I am, close to Fabienne's place, jewelry place that had a box. I thought it was hilarious. So Adam, one of our decisions, interim decisions, is that in the authoring space we're building, you will have lots of knowledge resources around you. The authoring thing is going to be a cube in the beginning. I call it a cube. You can flatten it so it's not really a cube. It's a rectangle 3D. Spawn it by tapping your main hand, not your secondary hand, simple things. And then what? Mark has been really kindly pushing on how do you deal with the things in space. So here's one list. We don't need to look at it in detail because we'll have different ideas, but the things in space we need to deal with, it's the same as last year. It's basically references. Right? Of course, there will be images, 3D, all of that stuff, but most of it for an academic user will be references. So here's an example. You have your authoring gray box. Then you have a reference. It's got a title, author name, year. Obviously, you can see I mistyped it. You do an interaction with it, you should be able to read it to an extent. And if it's an annotated bibliography like we talked about earlier, it should also say what your annotation is. Yes, Fabienne?
Okay, it's going to sound a little bit off topic because I did not follow everything before. But when I see you holding the physical cube, it also, and the discussion about scrolling before, it reminded me of a prototype I've done where you hold the phone and the orientation of the phone change the speed of the scrolling. So you auto scroll,
yes,
the page
yes,
is going to
yes.
go down. And I was thinking about this for the cube itself, namely if you hold the cube and one of the face is one of the document you're reading, the orientation of the cube, let's say the more vertical it is, the faster it would scroll, and the flatter or the more horizontal it is, the slower it would do. Like this kind of things that I've been done with our phone, I think would be interesting to explore there in XR.
100%. And as Adam did, one of the demos was to stick the reading space to your face. So if you move your face, it follows you. So you can lie back and read up. These are absolutely the types of things we need to do. The problem here, and Adam, thank you for being the excuse to do a little bit of a recap, is at least for me, separating the authoring bit from the research reading bit has been mentally really hard to build an interaction for that. Because it is clear that academic authoring is very, very much reading, volume reading, reading a thing, but also having 100 different citation sources and potentials in space, as you worked on with Mark and other things. So that is why we have currently, and I know this is a repetition, but for clarity, we have this beautiful left-hand menu that comes from you originally, with the text coming out. Fabienne has the wrist menu that we use, and that toggles certain things. So all we've done for now is on your main hand, you touch, and then you get this cube. And that cube represents your writing product, and that is really key. Secondly, how we actually put things into the cube, I have no clue. I find it extremely difficult mentally to deal with. It's almost depressing in its complexity, but that's why we have a community to do this together, right? And then finally, before I take this away, a huge part of what we're trying to do now is not that little cube, because obviously it'll have to be unfolded and a lot of things. It's quite simply to figure out how best to have these references in space, right? That is such a big part of it. Any final questions on this? Oh yeah, really briefly, on a simplicity bit, there is, I don't know if everybody saw this, but there is a field in BibTeX, annotate. So if the original source has had a user write, I think this and this is my summary, blah, 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 that can go into a normal BibTeX that can be stored in Zotero. It can be used in Author Reader or whatever, doesn't matter. So that's really nice. We do not have to invent any new data formats here. We do not have to try to change the world in a massive way. All we need to do is present it better. For the people in Sweden, please go ahead.
Yes. For the people in Sweden, it's so one of the things that would be relatively easy, technically speaking, to do is the sphere on the left. The principle is also that you bind any function by drag and dropping on it. Right now, it's toggling the view of things you can interact with, like comments or text. We could also do the same on the right with the authoring, let's say, related cube. But what could be interesting is probably to be face specific, namely when you drag something on it, we would have to think about it because then it might require switching hands, or I would suggest maybe detaching the cube from the wrist when you start to want to interact with it. But if you drop something on the face of a cube, it would highlight or put it visually like a wireframe, and then you would do that action to that face.
It's really interesting you should say that because we went to this military museum by you this weekend, Fabian, and Edgar bought an F-22. And very fun talking about all kinds of military stuff. So now jokingly made the motion of it being shot out. So here's the thing. As you know, I'm not personally fond of lasers in VR, but I do like throwing things. So maybe we should think of actions along what you're saying. It comes out in some way that is more, has more physics to it to make it more something. I don't know.
This goes back to my discussion last time about when we, like the three principles that I'm developing for the next, right? When an object has a natural kind of affinity, like for example, we throw a ball, we turn a page. There's things that we do with objects in in the real world. They could, if we're trying to stay true to the presence, do that same activity in the world that we are building for them in the virtual world. There's also the principle, if they exist in the physical world, we can also transform them to do something else. But I think when we're working with users and people that are not familiar with VR spaces, especially in this context of scholarly work, we're actually trying to retain the presence of those objects in that virtual space because people expect them to behave a certain way. If I were building something fun and artistic, I would probably break that tradition. So that'd be the third principle of my principles, right? I throw books when I'm mad at them. As I mentioned before, the Gutenberg Elegies, I friggin' hate that book. And if you look at my copy, it's in terrible condition because I threw it so many times across the room, and I pick it up and I read some more and I throw it again. That's my visceral response to things I hate, books I hate. So I think we should be able to throw books. And Rob, anything you wrote, I hold dear to my heart. There's smooch marks all over it.
Oh, yeah, Danny, I cannot tell you how I agree with that, except to say that my dream for the future of textbooks is quite simply in 100 years, a teenager has a paper version that is so red, underlined, and battered they can hardly read it, but it inspires something. It's very strange. My dream isn't digital.
That's my copy of Hell's writing machines. It's in such tattered condition because I've used it so much that pages are falling out. I've had to tape pages back in. I've written and written and written, and I highlighted it in the same place 3 times, different colors. So, yeah.
Looking at a lot of comments here, and I'm going to ignore some of them. But so Mark is saying he likes scrolling. There's nothing inherently wrong with scrolling. Oh, sorry, you have your hand up. Please say it yourself. Sorry.
Oh no, it was about something else. But no, I absolutely like scrolling because, and I think it's been alluded to by someone already. We're moving away from print, so this idea of things having to be in rectangular boxes is a perceived notion of normality that we take from 500 years of print. It's not how text has to be. So the other thing I was thinking about is this thing of, well, if you're having to jump from rectangular box to rectangular box because, hey, it's page end, it's actually remarkably disruptive, I find, to my flow state. Although as someone who works in hypertextual tools a lot, moving between things that I have chosen to be different is a completely different thing because that's an intentional move. But making an arbitrary move simply because of some, well, completely arbitrary thing to do with a technology we're moving away from, I don't find helpful. So that's my take on the scrolling, and it's not to be argumentative. I hadn't really thought about it until it was raised today. I quickly, because I see Brown's got a hand up. The point I was bringing up was the interesting thing that you showed in the last little slideshow that I've been thinking on a lot. And the point the reason I made the point about, well, can we have a sort of test space that's got 10 or 20 objects in it, is that there is a time when you may want to see the text that's in an object. And I use object because we've got to call it something, but I don't really think of it as anything more than a bit of data in the space. I know what it is because I put it there or I chose for it to be there. So there's a transition state where you want, I want the thing that's up there or the one that's down there, and then I might want to unpack it and actually see the text maybe floating in space in front of me. But most of the time, I don't want that because it's just noise. Because the more things you have, the more those labels intrude upon your ability to actually keep track of the space. So if you're working with, say, a paper, you've maybe got 70 or 80 references. Alone. That's without all the other bits you do. And so actually being able to have those in the space and in a sense jump to them, and as a sort of like, in a sense, this is like another mini memory palace. So you put them there for a reason. You don't need to know all the time their exact detail, but we know because they're data that they are just, whether it's inside the headset or somewhere out on the internet, that data is available. So there's a transition, there's an interaction. We say, oh, right, now I need to see that in more detail. Or I might just want an interaction that says, take the information that's in there and now put it into the writing space that's attached to my cube. That was my thought, anyway.
Mark, just as a really brief thing before Brandel, when scrolling is just one way of changing what you're seeing. Being able to fold a section or expand or collapse, that's what we're talking about, the big package of interactivity. I'm not trying to frame everything in a rectangle. So we do agree. We just have a different way of choosing to expand our vocabulary at this point, I think. I have no truck with any of what you just said. Brandel, and then over to Sweden.
So I agree with what you said, Mark, except for the part where you said we're moving away from print. Because I think that when we bundle all of the attributes of print in together into one notion of what print is, then we can largely throw the baby out of the bathwater. One of the things that it sounds like what you're primarily doing is reading on a fixed display, fixed mounted screen of some kind. With some kind of indirect interface using a mouse or a trackpad. God save you. But I think that there are, but the direct interaction surface of a phone and something that we can probably aim to do as and where it's kind of beneficial within a virtual and constructed environments is to have display surfaces kind of encode for themselves and interactions with them to be able to be done with enough parent immediacy to be able to kind of represent them. So I think that's an important part of what we can get out of it. I think one of it was pretty bad disservice that Apple made when they made scroll bars disappear. Um, I think that having that is probably necessary, but actually pretty wildly insufficient as a marker of what a document constitutes by virtue of it being kind of in a certain visual state. And I will be very excited to see what people do when they realize they have the room to spread out. And to be able to put more markers of what is determinative of state on and around an element in order to be able to kind of make these inferences, like your code folding, your area folding, Frode. I think that's an absolutely relevant thing as well, to be able to have these dualities and sort of view-centric kind of modifications of a document that are kind of baked in as easily as possible.
Sorry, thank you, and obviously Adam and Fabian.
Yeah, it's to go back a bit on Dini's point and throwing books and the different affordances to them. It's honestly, I feel the same, and yet I feel a bit conflicted because, so technically, Brand also has done like a beautiful book with folded pages. I've done that also too. I've seen example, and I see physical example in front of me now of crumble and folded pages that change the way the content is being displayed, and it's interesting in a lot of ways. The problem I have with this is I worry that if we do this, we go back to skeuomorphism. So we need to find ways to, yes, do it in a way that the usage, for example, and how titled a page or a whole book is, or if we like crumble a page, I think it's powerful. If we tear apart, I mean, there are so many really high quality affordances, but how do we not get trapped into just quote unquote like reproducing the real? So yeah, and it's just like a generic remark. I don't have any deeper thought to it. It's just I'm excited of, let's say, repurposes some of the past prototype to do this kind of things, but it's kind of a slippery slope, and I don't know how to both do it, enable potentially new usage and whatnot, but not getting stuck in those old ways, let's say.
I mean, I'm very grateful for the guiding that Dini, who was the proper academic, I managed to squeeze by, has really helped us have an annotated bibliography as being the core work for our actual work. So the handling of bits of citations that have annotations on them, putting them in a sequence, well, first organizing them to organize your thoughts, putting them into a shape seems like a simple thing, but as you know more than anybody, Fabian, the complexity that arises is amazing. But at least it means there's a lot we don't need to think about. There's a lot of aspects that are just out of scope at the moment. So it at least helps me to calm down a little bit. Peter.
Yeah, I was wondering if anyone ever thought about using squarified tree maps for navigation. And there's a link to the main paper on it.
I can't actually open the link, but is it the same as the tree map we often use to find what are the heavy directories on a disk?
Yeah. Yes, same one. Same radial gradient in each of them.
Well, typically that's how I use them. I use tree maps usually to like, wow, my disk is full. Why? Where is it? And then I can like drill down super efficiently. But to be honest, that's pretty much the and some data visualization. But otherwise, I don't use it for navigation except when there is like one obvious criterion, which
I'm
usually
thinking of
is
using it.
the file
I'm
type.
thinking of using it to navigate the structure of a paper, as opposed to the directory structure of a drive.
But what would be the metric that you use in order to organize them? Because I imagine it's not the number of words per, let's say, section.
No, I think maybe the number of new concepts that have been flagged and linked in each section.
So one thing that I found with actual papers in the real world is that they're very short. And that means visualizing a specific paper, unless it's a really key paper, you want to get your brain around in many ways, it's just not worth it. You know, you first, many of us anyway, we'll read the last sentence of the abstract first, because that's kind of the conclusion. Jump around a few times, look at the images, whatever, and find what we need. And then slowly read through it. There's so many ways to visualize it, but the related problem to that is our own book, The Future of Text. It's a collection of papers, just like a journal is, or rather a set of proceedings from a conference. So if we're talking about reading all of that as one package, Peter, then I think what you're talking about makes more sense. So also to try to define the atomic corpus to do these things is frustrating because obviously we can keep redefining it all the time, but yeah. And also, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to Peter,
Yeah.
but yeah. I think, Peter, that I'm not sure about. I don't read enough papers to know myself, but I think that there's an implicit sequentiality to a given paper, but a collection of papers, to Frode's point, like the entirety of the future of text, or if you saw, I posted in the Slack about the ISBN space navigator. It seems to me, and I would be curious on your take of this, that a tree map has an implicit sort of equality of entry where any given sort of entry point is more or less the same as another one. So to look at a single sort of conceptually linear corpus is going to have challenges unless you expect it to be kind of random access like a reference document or thing. But once you zoom out past that, then I think that tree map could be a really relevant frame of reference. I don't know. Do you feel like a paper that has that sequential element has a manner in which it can be rendered tree mapped?
Well, probably less so at the paper scale. I'm thinking more at the dissertation level and up.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So I know Mondays are obviously supposed to be all over the place, but in terms of having mental support for thinking about what we're talking about and then, you know, looking at our Sloan work, one of the problems with XR is too much opportunity, at least for me. You know, you can basically do absolutely anything, right? So I was thinking about different words like constrained or framed, but then of course we have a fantastic word, scaffolded. Thanks, Fabian. So I think might be very, very good for our thinking is to think of the reading environment as being in a essentially 2D space. inspired a little bit by Brandel's work with Bob Horn that can be moved, but obviously having some depth to it. And if you then choose to go out of that 2D, fine, you should be able to. But to immediately be able to put anything anywhere in space, I think will be mentally difficult for a new user plus us if we're going to differentiate things. But of course, the frame or scaffold of this thing should be room scale if you want it to be. But it allows, I mean, like, to bring it up again, what Mark and Mark and Adam did with the ACM citation mapping. A lot of it is very sparse. You know, Mark has told me again recently that very often they don't cite within the same discipline, so it just doesn't go anywhere, right? But if we're going to do all these cool and useful views, do we agree that maybe that's a nice way to think about it? Like a completely transparent ice cube, but we have experiments within it, maybe? Peter, first, please.
Yeah, one thing I can imagine would be standing between two parallel walls or two curved spaces that are sort of wrapped around me, and one would have concepts, so it'd be sort of like the author concept map, and the other wall on the opposite side would be a citation network of all of the references. And if I touched a reference on the one wall, that would cause any corresponding related concepts to get highlighted on the other wall, and vice versa.
Yeah, I think that's extremely aligned, Peter, with what we're thinking about, because you can have different walls and then you can choose whether they will know about each other or not. So yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I was thinking just generalizing that point out further is sort of, so essentially what I'm hearing is essentially there's an input and an output space. So there's the thing that you're looking at. So I'm sitting at two screens, and one of them, most of my time, one is input and one is output. I'm writing in one, I'm actually reading, so in a sense, looking at stuff in the other, organizing it. Whether they're sort of defined areas, or, literally defined areas in the space, or whether they're just, well, I put this stuff over there and I put that stuff over there, I suspect is a matter of personal choice and comfort. I suspect the more people are used to working with knowledge spaces, the less they probably need to have defined sort of guardrails around it. But as I say, because I think that's, it's partly what helps you keep track of sort of where you are in the space. It is pertinent, though, in terms of if we want to effectively have a display within a display. So we're in our XR space, but we now want to basically do another visualization. Let's say, for sake of argument, a timeline of something. And rather than the whole space changing, it might be that you basically want to see that, in a sense, nested within that. Now, informationally, I think that's sort of possible. I'm not saying I know how to code it, but I mean, I don't think we're not needing anything extra that we don't have. It's more actually how we construct it in a way that makes sense to ourselves and the technology allows. Because the bit I got a bit lost in the cube is whether it's a mode control system or some kind of a nested workspace, and it's not to me clear which of those it is. The problem with it being a sort of workspace is then where is all the other stuff you're looking at, which to me is probably the biggest part of the value if I'm going to go and do some work in XR. Otherwise, I might as well actually do it on an arguably less capable 2D surface, but at least I can have all the control of all those things. Yes.
To reply to that first, the cube is a desperate attempt at a something. So those questions you asked are not currently answered. The gimmick around it is that, let's say you move it over, suddenly it expands and you have all kinds of elements. I have no idea. It's just like, for crying out loud, we need a thing. So to the other point, to Peter's point, which I think is really, really important, if we write hypertextually, and I could, as in node-based, link-based, right? We still need, for the current academic world, a narrative. There's got to be an introduction, a middle, and an end. There's got to be some kind of a structure, different disciplines, different things, but you can't just hand an academic a murder wall, right? It's like, where do I start? So it's so nice to be reminded, Peter, of the kind of different walls, because I'm thinking if I redesign author myself, which is just 2D, we have a writing mode, a map mode, and then we have an outline. That's what we have now, 3 ways of viewing the information. We may need a card view, because the problem if you have an outline and you start moving things about, first of all, technically it's really hard to know where text begins and ends and certain things, it gets messy. But also you lose that thread, right? And in some cases, in some stages, it's really important not to have that thread. It's an artificial bad constraint. But when you communicate with others, they should at least be able to access some of those things. So to think about the notion of having an input, output, as Mark says, and maybe an organizing space in the middle is not a bad idea, and to keep them rectangular-ish. Yeah, that was useful. Right, Sweden. I don't know if it's Adam or Fabian talking, so yeah, Sweden.
It's me at least. But so it's for the scaffolding part, one little, one I think interesting property of it, at least in pedagogy, is it's supposed to be temporary. You're not supposed to always have the scaffolding in your face. It's not supposed to be mandatory. So if, for example, either the idea that Peter just proposed with a curve on each side, or the cube, and also, for example, Frode in your last presentation, when at some point was blinking to kind of prompt people to tinker with it, or some of the idea also mentioned today, the scaffolding is supposed to, again, optionally help or optionally support people. So if we have a crazy merger wall for an academic, to be honest, that's not necessarily problematic to me in the sense that it should be at some point a bit weird. It should be at some point a little bit different. Otherwise, I don't think we're doing anything interesting. But it should be scaffolded in the sense that it should not remain weird. It should start weird and be different at some point, really. But bit by bit, it should not be to the point that the person who has used it a couple of times, for example, does not need that scaffolding and might need the scaffolding for other even weirder things that we might not even have thought of. But it was just to highlight the point of it being a temporary steps to support either a new workflow or a workflow that is foreign to somebody who is trying whatever in the space.
I'd like to jump in. I'm going to go back to the cube that we're talking about, and also now we're talking about all the different kinds of things that we're doing to write annotations, etc. So in my mind, what I'm imagining with the cube is that the cube, of course, we've shown that the cube can fold out into a rectangle, right? But we can fold it back into a cube. Ideally, if I were working on this myself, I would organize it so that I was having it as a cube. I'd have what I'm writing, working on writing on one side of the cube, turn it to look at my annotations, turn it to see the article that I've been looking at, and be able to scroll if I need to. Move it like this to see something else. If I want to, I can just fold it back out. But I think being able to control the spaces and have whatever I'm working on in front of me, that would be ideal. I also don't necessarily want it to follow me along like this. Floating in space is fine, and then I take it and turn it the way I want it to be, so I have control over that cube. So it stays more of a non-Euclidean object than it does a piece of paper on a wall, which is what Frode keeps talking about not wanting, right? The murder wall. So just throwing that out there.
Oh yeah, and Dini, I think you and Mark are saying something similar. He was writing, he's working on an ATM, I guess you mean ACM paper.
Yes, sir.
A murder wall in one
ATM.
and a narrative. Yeah, it is an ATM, and they suck money out of us. So it's a murder wall in one view spec and narrative in another one. Of course, Mark, you and Dave Millard wrote a fantastic paper, 7 Types of Hypertext, where one of the key insights for me, and it really helped me finish my thesis, is hypertext for thinking, hypertext for communicating are different things. They may be the same initial things, absolutely. It is an n-sided index here, Mark, but I think if we now, because the dream of this magic cube, I mean, you've all seen Foundation, I hope, at least one episode for the visual. You've at least seen the trailer, right? Great. Okay. So there's a tesseract, which is a cool looking thing, and you do it this, that, and the other with it, and then you get sparkly bits floating. Emotionally, that's probably what we want. Practically, obviously not, right? So from what Dini is saying, which 100% aligned with it, you flip it over to get a view of your annotations, for instance. But as Mark says, you may want that to be a hell of a lot bigger than a rectangle, right? So it would be really nice once we start building this to be able to have further interactions. And that's why I love the hand menus. So if we have a way to draw it out, right? Because the only thing that I want to segregate at this point for the user is source and manuscript. It needs to interconnect, but when you're writing something, you need to be able to know when I leave the room, what is the new piece of knowledge I have made? I don't want to take the whole gosh darn library with me, though it should be connected, right? So when you open it up, so when you turn it over and you do, let's say, obviously, all of you who develop are going to laugh at me. Let's pretend it's an actual pinch and you drag it out and you do something else. Here's the key thing. How many of you know about the Starfire project? Sun Microstation, long time ago. One of the really cool interactions was, this is 90s. You had a display, touch sensitive. If you wanted to move something, you would touch it and move it. If you wanted to copy it, you would touch it with 2 fingers and move it, meaning that 1 finger stayed behind, so that's how it duplicated. Really elegant, right? So you literally split it. So I can imagine if we, obviously we're so constrained with the realities of gestures in XR now because of the definition, touching, and all these issues. But if we could develop a vocabulary like that where you open it up to view just the rectangle is fine, but if you need the bigger space of it, instead of pressing a stupid button, how can we allow that to happen? That's the poetry behind it. Fabienne, please.
So I personally don't have any attachment to the cube. The one thing though I do like about it, well, a couple of things, but the number one thing is it's geometrically it's very easy both to do, and it's how do you say, low maintenance, like it's super cheap. It's one of the primitive, and it's also literally primitive. So if somebody wants a tesseract, or well, tesseract's a bit trickier, but let's say another primitive, another shape. I think the work that would be done on something like a cube in terms of being able to have either traditional interactions like grabbing it, turning it around with and tossing it, or weirder one like unfolding it, and maybe when you unfold it, some of the faces are different size or whatnot. But I think that's let's say the exploration with that first primitive, I'm rather convinced would be fruitful for any other primitive that we would use to manipulate other knowledge objects or document. And even if one of them, it's an affordance to the cube or to that primitive itself is not interesting, that's okay. And if we switch it to another, the mechanisms in place would make it, I imagine, pretty straightforward. So in my opinion, it's a worthy path to explore, regardless of the shape, let's say, of the cube itself. Even though, again, I believe it's a good starting point.
Very good to hear. Just gonna
I like Carl's model here. Carl, I've used that for making poetry too. Interactive poetry.
Mark, could you speak what you wrote, but obviously briefly? It's just better for the record.
Oh yeah, surely. The thing that's still sort of I'm still trying to wrap my head around is okay, it quite legitimately you get to the point where you have a particular reference that you then want to basically have an interaction with your long form narrative that you're producing in your writing space. That I understand, but I get back to this point. So you've got 50, 70 references, and this is just one of them. It's how you see the transition where you say, right, that's the one I want, and then are you expecting all the others to go away? What I'm trying to understand is, do we have basically lots of different views in the same environment, or do we step from an environment to an environment, which I don't think is necessarily confusing for you as a user if you're expecting it. It's just that at the moment there's a missing step change here, because for instance, it's the point at which this object, rather than all its siblings, is the one that you want to see with more information presented around it, whether it's text or whether it's some other thing that we are interested in. I mean, in the instance you showed, it most likely is the text, because one of the things you want to do maybe is you want to assert that this is now a reference that goes at this linear place in the long form document. But I also, my sort of 2 decades of working in sort of spatial hypertext is that if you just step out to that, you lose the context, the wider context. One of the things that workspace really offers, and which XR really offers for us, is to have that contingent matter. So stepping outside it just for the convenience of seeing 2 things at once may actually be detrimental to what we want to do. I don't have a hard view on this, but that's just sort of what's rattling around my brain at the moment. Yeah.
So let's fight. These concepts fight each other, right? So we want to be able to fill the space usefully, obviously. And it goes back to what we're talking about at the very beginning today, which is hiding, revealing, and also adding connections. Completely agree with you. We shouldn't freeze dry a flattened nonsense and send it off to the world. However, when someone opens up the product of this, they should be able to read it with 70 other documents, right? Again, Mark, this is not saying against anything you've said. I'm talking about the concepts kind of fight each other in a bit, because when you choose to fold your manuscript again, you may very well want to be able to include your entire library, let's say, if there's a possibility of that. But it is really, really important that the shape that you have built, the connections you have made, the logic, all of that is a presentable thing. You know, that can be presented to someone maybe as a tiny little 9-inch original Macintosh, tiny little card for the sake of argument, floating in space. But then, of course, it needs to unfold to have all these connections you're talking about, which is why the data and the metadata is so important. So I think it's really, really valuable. We talk in terms of the scaffolding to make it possible to make it small for some views and make it amazingly huge for others. Dini, please.
This question is for Fabienne. This is a production question. I'm working on the idea of hypertext and VR space and how different we can map on spatial computing with not just in the space, but through the space in a 3-dimensional cube. So if we're indeed going to be working with a cube, let's imagine that I'm on one side of the cube with my annotation and I've made a hyperlink. Normally we think of hyperlinking as going across like this on a 2D plane. And what I'm imagining is that we can even go through the cube to the other side and link to the paper that I'm writing on the other side. So hypertext is not just width and height, it's also depth. So then we start talking about 3-dimensional hypertexts and how to make that work. It's kind of like playing 3D chess, right? So imagining a 3D chessboard, but instead of a flat board with pieces on top and stacks going down, this is now on our cube, and this will make it very easy to hyperlink things across different objects that I'm writing and using for my reading. How hard would that be? And do I need to make a model for you? Do I need to draw it out and send it to you and let you look at it?
Well, I always appreciate drawings. I think it's always helpful, to be honest, because I think I understood, but I'm not sure. If I understood correctly, though, it's basically 2 3D coordinates in space, namely the point you're linking from and the point you're linking to, and that it has to, or that you prefer if it goes through the cube, it's actually easier. So it's not, from what I understood, that's kind of the default way I would do it. And I've already done that where if you move any, I don't remember. I want to say 4 months ago, I did a point where you had a link to the word hand, and then a line between the word hand and the hand itself. And if you move any, they would move. So you can imagine it's exactly, from what I understand, the same. Namely, instead of being the ID of an entity within that 3D space, it would be a reference, which would be an annotation of something else, and you visually show it. So if that's that, then it's no problem.
So my next question is, this is a two-part question, then I have to go to my other meeting. But so let's imagine I'm reading something on this side. We've linked it to the annotation on the other side of the cube, and we're doing like
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
and I'm able to see that. Now let's imagine I want to unfold the cube.
Yeah.
Now the link is showing across in this flattened 2D space, right? It's become now this linear 2D environment, but then we wrap it back around in the 3D. I think that would be really interesting.
So theoretically, that's also not a problem, because you have basically two type of coordinates. One, they're like world coordinates, like the 3D XYZ coordinate of those two things, let's say, in the entire space. And then you have local coordinates, which typically here would be how, let's say, a piece of text relates not to the world, but to the surface of the cube. And if it's done this way and you maintain the hierarchy, then when you unfold the cube, it's still related to the face of that cube. So theoretically, I mean, naively speaking, that's no problem.
All right, that makes me very happy. Thank you.
That is very lovely.
I've been trying to work this out with Andrew, right? Trying to figure out theoretically how this is going to work, and then is this possible out of theory and in practice? So that answers my question. So thank you for that. There's my
No problem.
paper for the hypertext conference.
So it's just to highlight that a tiny bit more. Usually, it's something that is a world coordinate versus local coordinate. Kind of, it's not a headache, but it's something you fight against, kind of. But in this kind of situation, it's extremely powerful. It's very useful, and that's why having a semantic hierarchy, they are not just objects in space, but they're related, for example, to the face of the cube, makes perfect sense. So if done right, that would be a good, really good application of that.
I've already, I mentioned before, I was doing this in my motion tracking lab, right? I was able to make the room a 3D space, and I was able to program in various places in that grid different kinds of media, right? And then I'd hold my tracker in my hand, and the 3D, the infrared tracking information would find that object, that media, and then it would evoke it, right? And it would do something like, put animation on a wall, or evoke some sound, or make the light machines move, right? Do something. So I've been doing this already in motion tracking, but what I haven't done it in, but it seemed logical to think about, is how to do it in this 3D visual, multimedia space of the XR environment that we're building. So it's the same thing I've been doing, but now it's, instead of around me, it's in my hands. The room is in my hands, so to speak.
And a quick remark, though, it's the cube has the scale we want it to have. So if at some point we want to blow up the cube and fold back on itself around us, same, like that's the same principle. It should not be a problem.
That'd be great. I'd love to get back in my lab. That technology died about a decade ago. Hey, folks, I need to get to the other meeting, so I'm going to say goodbye to all of you, and I need to wash my hands because the cat drew blood when he just scratched me. So
Oh, that's not good.
Take care.
Yeah, see you
bye,
later,
everybody.
Dini.
Good to
Thank
see
you.
everybody. My God, I can't believe I saw you. I can't, you're back. So welcome, Adam. Bye.
Yeah, you've made me more happy, Adam, than I would like to have recorded on a video. So I know you're just here for today, whatever, but very happy to see you. I'm very, very happy. Okay, so here's the thing. Fabian, you may not like the beginning of this.
Oh,
I've been trying to simplify. Let's say that for the sake of argument,
just going.
we take the wrist on the non-dominant hand, the left hand, and we don't let it do what it currently does, but we let that control the environment, the source, right? So what I'm thinking about is, because I'm so grateful, Mark, that you keep bugging me about the source and environment, because that has been intentionally ignored until this stage. So imagine we have, I'm just going to use right and left for simplicity, okay? On your right hand, what you do, most of your pointing interaction with all of that stuff, great, right? That's where you have, as we currently proposed, touch your wrist, and you get your writing cube shape, whatever the thing is, tesseract, whatever. Fine. There's going to be a lot of issues about turning it, interacting with it, all of that known. But what about if the left hand produces the Peter walls, right? And so it doesn't necessarily just produce a background source space, but it may have controls for source, product, thinking, right? So it has a different affordance. So whether you're pointing to your left hand or your right hand, not only the wrists, but also the controls. Trying to, if you read from left to right, which we do in English, there is a certain flow, right? You expect the source to be there, the result to be there, that kind of stuff. What do you think of the general notion of mapping it more scaffolded? I'm going to shut up. There's a lot of thinking going on.
It's 1 o'clock.
No, it isn't.
It is somewhere in two places at least, actually. I'm not sure, to be honest, I fully understood. What I can tell you again, just from the technical standpoint or implementation, we can flip the affordances around from the hand and the pinch. Kind of annoys me, but it's feasible for sure, because it's kind of hairy part of the code, but it's feasible. And the cubes or sphere from one side to the other, to switch them also is no problem. So I'm not sure if that addresses the question, but yeah, left or right is
well, it is very, very difficult, because when we all, well, those of you old enough, the very first Macintosh was absolutely immaculate, but it was tiny. So if you were writing a small thing, it was absolutely beautiful. But if you had 200 documents and 300 sources, you couldn't do it. Just wasn't space, right? So we're going to run into the same thing now. If we do a kind of a CD-ROM demo of, sources and all beautifully laid out, then see you later, Brandel. Thanks for being here.
Brandel.
That's yes. Also, yes, Carl. We want to change collections of sources. Call them libraries or folders. Oh yeah, thank you, Tom. We want to be able to change that. It is really, really, really important to be able to do it in an efficient manner, and then to change the views. So if we have infinite interaction potential, then we have nothing to hold on to. So we got to have some rails or scaffolds or whatever, at least in the beginning, maybe forever, but at least in the beginning, right? So we got to have the means through which you do something. And now you see all the ACM papers so-and-so, for instance. And then you say, okay, I want to see it in a different layout, and you change the layout. These are obvious things we talked about often, but to try to bring it into an actual interface for this, I find really hard. And that's why I'm grateful that we have at least separated your writing manuscript box from your sources, interaction-wise. Yes, Mark, we're 2 minutes over, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, and because I'm literally going to drop in a moment too. I'll just throw one more thought in. So if you have got that, and you have got effectively, you brought in all these things, and you sort of need to lay them out. One way you do it in sort of conventional tools is you might essentially use some sort of query to do some sort of a spatial layout for you. Why? Because you put the metadata in there, you know it's there, you can interact with it. You don't have to do everything using your hand, because it's fine for 10 things, not so good for 100. And the real sort of what's the right word? But the benefit of this space is you can actually deal with quite large things. So one of the things to just consider, and I'm not going to try and answer that today, is that might be one of the more interactions. So for instance, you might want a way in which you can say, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to take all the objects of a certain type, and I want you to sort of do some transform into the way that they appear for me. It might be on date, it might be on whatever.
Yeah.
But that's just something to consider.
No, I absolutely agree with you, Mark. And just really briefly, Tom, just to share screen, to remind you that those what? Why are you interrupting me, phone? Right. As you know very well, Mark, in the map view in author, right, there's the beginning, because we have the what to select. So we turn things on and off this way and whatever, right? That's partly, so I don't think you mean acquire necessarily by typing, but then we can start doing things like this. But now that I've selected something, what does that mean? Am I holding it? Can I do further things and so on? So we do need a wide variety of means through which we select and issue commands. Yeah, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would say here is, we do need to think about, the space we're in terms of, the problem with the cube is, and it's both an advantage and a disadvantage, but a cube is a boundary, it's a set of boundaries, and you are stuck within that set of boundaries. There are times when that is appropriate. There are times when you want to be inside and not have it raining on your head. There are other times, however, when you want to explore that wider world. And so, one thing I think we should not lose sight of is this idea that somehow we can transition in and out of the cube into a broader horizon that has an infinite number of cubes, or that allows us to jump into a completely different cube very easily. Or maybe that I am looking at Peter's cube, and Peter's working on this really cool thing in his cube, and I want to jump over and look at what is in his cube, and so on and so forth. And that these are not only workspaces, but also collaborative spaces. And thinking about this, and one of the big advantages I see with XR is the fact that I can be working with you guys remotely, and I don't have to be in London, and I don't have to be in Houston, and I don't have to be in Sweden or wherever everyone is, and but that I can jump back and forth seamlessly and get past that limitation of space and time, and that to me is where the real advantage is. So I will say, I think the cube is a good idea, but it's a three-dimensional space where we want, we need to never lose sight of the fourth dimension. Let's just say that.
Yeah, those are all good points. When it comes to working with other people, that's out of scope because we really don't have the capability to develop a kind of a networked environment. But I do remember back in the day doing shoot 'em up games with my brother where we would have our laptops next to each other and have audio separates. So I do hope that the operating systems will allow us, while in WebXR, to somehow share experiences or something. It's heavy lifting, so it's important, Tom, just not something we can do. The cube
But
is.
I just want to make sure we leave the door open for that, because I think it will come. It may not be here yet, but it will come, I think.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Already on the Vision Pro, you can do certain shared experiences. And when it comes to the cube is just like a beginning hand-holding things. It is very important that it can be exploded into something big. And for Mark's comment earlier, Mark and I think we agree. And the reason I showed author was not to say we should have that kind of interaction at all. It was just to say that there should be many different ways we can choose how to do layouts, what we want to see, to do queries, including, in addition, typing a query or speaking or whatever. Anyway, that's all good for today. And any other final comment? Oh, Mark had to go make dinner. That's cool. And Fabian, how many days are you going to be spending up in the frozen wastelands of the north?
Well, until I get kicked out.
Or until certain people in Brussels start screaming loudly enough for you to come back. Yes, one of those two.
Couple of days.
That's very good. How are
Hopefully
you?
I'll send a couple of photos too, including 360s.
You better. Oh, I was going to ask you a specific question about that, Fabian. Because of the whole depth perception and all of that, do you appreciate pictures that have a little bit blurred background in order for the depth to be more enjoyable in a normal flat picture? Or does that, if everything is just as sharp, is that fine too?
I don't know what you mean by appreciate, but for example, portrait photos on the iPhone, I like bokeh effect. I find it aesthetically pleasing.
Okay, that's enough. That was an interesting regarding that. So Adam, how are you?
Yeah, no, I'm fine. It's very nice to have Fabienne up here in the north. We'll try to do both go out ice skating and on the lakes if possible.
Proper ice skating.
And do some XR work. Perhaps both of them at the same time in different combinations. We'll see. That's the plan.
Yes.
Sounds a bit perfect.
Exciting.
Perfect indeed. Sorry, I'm just looking at Carl's message. Yeah, no idea about conferences about that yet. Okay, yeah, we're 10 past. Thank you all for today. Personally, I'm finding this aspect of the work, trying to build a space for authoring, really, really, really difficult. And it, literally pulling my hair out before, we see each other, and then we get into these useful discussions. So I'm very, very, very grateful. We are getting somewhere. And Adam, obviously, we hope to see you again. And yeah, that's it, really. All right, bye for now, everyone.
Bye bye.
Take care. Bye bye.